Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to TLC Live. As every Wednesday, we are here with you, and we've got an exciting show today. Andrea did a great job this week. She really packed the show with some excellent guests who've taken time out of their very busy schedules, and we appreciate each and every one of them. You know, we at TLC, we talk about it as social issues impacting the Latino community, and one of the issues that we're focusing on is the explosion, sort of an epidemic of obesity, which leads to type 2 diabetes. And while we know, and we've discussed with several physicians on the show, what is diabetes? What are the implications of untreated and undiagnosed diabetes, and the impact on taxpayers in the state of Texas, and the impact on counties like Harris County that have a what we call a charity hospital or a publicly funded hospital. And so we've already discussed that. But we also want to discuss the socioeconomics that lead to some of the difficulties that low-income communities have accessing healthy nutrition, accessing healthy options at grocery stores. And so there's a social impact. And what we want to find out is if the socioeconomic status of a person leads to poor health care outcomes. And we have some experts this morning from the University of St. Thomas, from our prestigious Rice University, and of course we've got the fabulous mayor of Angleton, who probably has to deal with some of these issues in his local community. So we want to thank everybody for joining us today. As usual, you can participate in the program by either getting on Facebook and asking your questions, or you can copy a link that appears on screen on your Facebook feed and copy that link and paste it into your browser, and you will be on the show with us. So those are two ways that you can participate in the program. So I'm going to flip it over to the fabulous Colombiana Andrea Gomez to introduce our fabulous guest this morning.
Good morning, Orlando.
Buenos días.
No me dejaste saludar.
Saluda ahora.
Buenos días a todos. Bienvenidos a TLC Live. And you already said it. It's an amazing show that we're going to have with special guests. And also the topic that we're going to discuss, impact our community. So I'm going to start introducing the three guests that we have today. Stephen Kleinberg. Klineberg. He is a doctor, professor in sociology from the Rice University. And also we have Dr. Perez Liston. He is an associate professor of finance at the University of St. Thomas. And also we have the mayor of Angleton. He is Jason Perez, but he was telling us that he is an elected volunteer mayor. So he said, I have a normal job, but I am doing this volunteer and I dealing every single day, and I'm seeing these issues that our community is having with obesity and diabetes type 2.
And Angleton is a community just south of Houston on Highway 288, and it's a growing community near Pearland. I believe it's in Brazoria County, if I'm not mistaken, Mayor. And, I had the opportunity to meet him a couple of weeks ago.
I know, he told me.
Yeah, so.
He told me.
Great. Okay, well, let's kick off with Dr. Stephen Kleinberg. Dr. Kleinberg, I don't know if you heard the introduction, but we want to talk about the socioeconomic impacts on healthcare outcomes. In other words, we've heard that people that are well educated, people that have middle class, that have a good income, have better access to deal with healthcare issues. And on the other end of the spectrum, the lower income folks have a more difficult time. From a sociologist's perspective, first of all, is that paradigm, is that theory correct?
Doctor, you are mute.
Steve, you're muted. So if you can unmute yourself.
Did that
There
work?
we go. Yeah, we got you.
Oh, okay. Oh, fantastic. This worked. New system here. Of course, you're right, Orlando. I mean, the deepening inequalities between rich and poor in Houston is one of the central challenges that the city faces as we try to build a viable, sustainable society for the 21st century. And Latinos are disproportionately coming here with very low levels of education, In our survey this year, for example, we asked them, do you and your family currently have any health insurance? And 41% of all Latinos, immigrant and non-immigrant in Houston, 41% said they had no health insurance. That inequality, that 44% have households making less than $37,000 a year. That inequality, that poverty operates dramatically in affecting access to quality healthcare, access to quality education, access to the opportunities that this society can provide for success in America. It is the central challenge that we face. How do we restore the opportunity structures that used to ensure that poor folks had a meaningful opportunity to succeed? We're in a world now where if you don't have access to quality education from birth to college, from cradle to career, you're locked out of the opportunity. The good blue collar jobs that used to be in Houston in the 1960s and 70s, big employers was Hughes Tool Company, Cameron Iron Works. You could drop out of high school with a strong right arm and a willingness to work hard, and you could be able to make a middle class wage. Those jobs have largely disappeared. Education has become the critical determinant
Hmm.
of a person's ability to earn enough money to support a family. And Latinos are disproportionately have less access to the education that is required for success in the 21st century economy.
But doctor, not only less access to the education, but also less access to places to buy the healthy food, to places to exercise. Because if we go to the Latino communities, the Latino barrios, as we say it in Spanish, you don't find easier these. You don't find a Whole Food, for example. You don't find grocery
Yeah,
stores that offer these kind of products for them. You don't find areas that they can exercise, and not necessarily to go to the gym, or not necessarily to buy a membership at the gym. It's just simple as a park. You don't find those things for them to also get access easy in their own communities, because many of them, they don't even have a car to drive somewhere
right,
else to buy
right.
those things. So it is not only a lack of education, but also lack to access to these
Oh,
kind of supermarkets, and just a simple space to work out.
yeah, no, exactly right. That's that, but all of them are tied into the deepening inequalities, right? And we're making some progress here. I mean, the Bayou Greenways initiative that has expanded access to linear parks across the entire region uh, is a real phenomenon. By the time the Bayou Greenways initiative is completed by the end of this year, 60% of everybody who lives within the city of Houston will be within walking distance of a Bayou Trail. And so opportunities are beginning to develop. We are recognizing across the board in Houston how critical this is going to be, especially for Hispanics who are 45% of the entire population of Harris County is now Hispanic. It used to be 6% back 30 years ago. This is the Houston future. How Hispanics succeed or do not succeed in the access to all those health things that make possible success over a long lifetime. If Hispanics don't make it, it's hard to see Houston making it. That's and of everybody, the other big thing in the census is that of everybody across all of Harris County, not ISD, HISD, not inner city Houston, of the 4.6 million people in Harris County, of everybody under the age of 20, who will be the workers and voters and citizens and taxpayers of Houston in the 21st century, of everybody under the age of 20, 51% are Latinos. 19% are African Americans. Just 20% of everybody under 20 is Anglo. So the Houston future is there. And it's not just what's happening to Hispanics. It's is Houston making the investments today that will ensure access to opportunity for all Houstonians as the 21st century evolves.
Yeah.
So it's
Uh,
a fascinating movement.
This is not just an issue in Houston. I think it's in Texas and in the South border. Let's talk a little bit about the impact not only in Houston but in all Texas and the South border. Let's start with Dr. Daniel Perez Liston, and then we're gonna go with the mayor that is facing this problem. Right there in the valley. I mean, in South Texas.
yeah, and one of the issues I want to bring up before Dr. Liston joins us is, we've talked to healthcare professionals before you guys appeared on this program about a week or so ago. We had the healthcare professionals, and we've been talking to the American Diabetes Association, the American Heart Association, uh, Harris Health. We've been talking to the University of Texas Health Science Center. And one of the things that we've discovered is that, there has to be economic incentives for the free market participants to work hand in hand with local governments and the community to establish facilities whereby areas that we know as food deserts can make healthy foods accessible to low income folks and people of color, the minority communities, particularly the Hispanic community, the African American community. And so, what we want to know is, does the private sector play a role in helping as a partner to improve accessibility to healthier foods? And Dr. Liston, I don't know if you were able to hear that, but if you have an opinion on that, why don't you share it with us?
Yeah, Orlando, thank you very much, and thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate being here with you and your audience. And I also want to thank Dr. Kleinberg for all the work that he's done over the years. I've seen a couple of his presentations, and he's really an advocate for Hispanic culture here in the Harris County area and the MSA of Houston. But yeah, I mean, I think for sure, I mean, this needs to be like a joint partnership between the private sector and also the public sector, right? And all the things that Dr. Kleinberg mentioned about, education being the key determinant to higher income levels and higher healthcare outcome levels is very, very important, very crucial. And what Andrea just mentioned about having access to, grocery stores that can give you, adequate food supply that is healthy. We all know about organic food and all this other kind of stuff. And also having access to playgrounds and places where you can, exercise and so on and so forth is important, right? So I guess the key goal is to achieve a higher level of education in the Hispanic community. And then how do you achieve that goal is the real question for policy makers in the Harris County area. And, there are many ways that we can do that, right? One of the ways that we can do that is through the child tax credit that the Biden administration has currently implemented. And of course, that child tax credit has actually helped lift people out of poverty, right? But also, the private sector can also help out, right, through the food bank. The Houston Food Bank is very important here in the area. There's other clinics like the San Jose Clinic that provide, dental services for lower income communities, affordable housing through, housing assistance and rental programs, stuff like that. So these are all the things that we need to do, right? But with that said, we aren't doing enough, right? I mean, I think that's a fact, right? And the data, bears that out, that we just haven't done enough, either the public sector or the private sector. So we need more robust and more rigorous programs that will help level the playing field, so to speak. One of the key metrics that I saw before coming on your show is that the wage gap between Latinas and white men is at 55 cents, right? So what that means is that Latina women are making 45 cents less per dollar than their white male counterparts, right? And really that wage gap over time has not changed. I mean, over the last few decades, it really hasn't changed. So there's lots of areas of improvement, and really the main thing is, having policymakers that are willing and able to address these issues head on.
I want to run because I hear these statistics that are put out by professors and data researchers that the income gap. But the question is, are these similarly circumstanced people? In other words, are you taking white males compared to Latina females that have the same level of education, and then say there's a disparity in income? Or are these just random folks that y'all are just because let's say a female Latina who's working a service job at a hotel, it can't be compared to a, let's say, British petroleum geologist. You know what I'm saying?
Of
So
course.
how do y'all adjust for that?
Of course, Orlando. Yeah. And of course, like all these studies, control for all those very specific factors that you're mentioning, right? So the job type, the age group, and all these different, control factors that we put into the study to help develop these wage gaps, right? Or identify these wage gaps. But there's other data, right? I mean, other data and just, forget about the wages, just look at the jobs that are being held, right? If you look at, executives, right, the majority of executives are not Hispanic, right? So we need to make progress in that area. Um,
That's an interesting point, Professor Liston, because I served on the Houston City Council and worked closely with the Greater Houston Partnership, which was essentially our big chamber of commerce. And it's amazing to me, and I think Professor Kleinberg would agree, that a city as diverse as Houston, the absolute dearth of CEOs and executive board members at the largest 100 companies of Houston of Latinos or African Americans, it's absolutely astounding to me.
It can I participate? It's
Absolutely.
it's uh, it's a big part of what we're living through. This is a fundamental transition from a city that had been biracial southern city, dominated and controlled throughout all of its history by white men, now in the midst of becoming the most ethnically diverse city in the country. And so every time I give a talk to the Greater Houston Partnership, it's overwhelmingly white men, but not as overwhelmingly white men as it was 5 years ago and 10 years ago. So you can see, but it is so slow and so much depends on ensuring that young Latinos acquire the technical skills that prepare them for the jobs of the 21st century. And the great, Laura Murillo and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce is celebrating more and more entrepreneurs in the Hispanic community, and you can see it coming, but it takes a long time, and
Okay.
what it means to be living at a time of fundamental transition,
Yeah.
and,
Uh, you
and
know,
so I think that's a big part of what's going on here.
yeah.
It's happening slowly.
One of the issues that was brought up, much to my amazement, I didn't really think about this when going back to the diabetes issue in urban areas like Houston, or any neighborhood, for example, because we focus on Hispanic issues, but we also are concerned about the issues facing the African American community and generally all low income communities. But this was astounding to me in terms of, I was having discussions with the University of Texas Health Science Center and Harris Health and several other nonprofit organizations. And a simple thing like a person living in the Fifth Ward, or what we call Segundo Barrio, which is Second Ward, the traditionally Hispanic neighborhood, how difficult it is just to walk around the neighborhood because of loose dogs. People are afraid of getting bit. There's all kinds of aggressive dogs in lower income neighborhoods. And so this is a great question for Mayor Perez, which, these are issues that municipalities have to partner with the healthcare providers and the private sector. Is how do we control loose animals so that families feel safe that their children won't be attacked by a pit bull, let's say. I mean, it probably doesn't happen in the Memorial area and the River Oaks area and where I live, but if you go out to the 5th Ward and 2nd Ward, I was in South San Antonio the other day and I just couldn't believe the number of, loose animals, and that has an effect on the community. So, Mayor, is that something that you guys are aware of and are working to improve the safety of the neighborhood so families feel safe in your neighborhoods?
Uh, yes, Mr. Orlando, appreciate the opportunity to be on y'all show. Yes, sir. Social media is a very powerful thing, and in our community, because we are kind of small, roughly about 20,000 in population. There's quicker access to their elected officials, and what we're seeing is on social media, folks will post a loose dog or an animal that's running what we call wild in the area. And so we do have to combat that with individuals who have allowed their animal to either escape from their backyard or was on a leash, and now they're roaming around the community. And so we have worked really hard with our animal control facility and officers to really get in those areas that that we consider maybe potentially the area that has a lot more animals running more freely. We're like all communities, we have our what I call segregated areas. Don't like to use that word, but we do have areas because this is an older community. We have the barrio, which is on our west side of town, and we have our African American community, which we call the West Side. And when I even ride around in the city, when I see loose dogs, I'll call city staff and have them come out and address the situation. But you're absolutely right. We do have to worry about that because, and it can be any part of our community that can happen. But we do see it maybe more so on those areas. Once again, it is the older part of town. Maybe a lot of folks there have their fences aren't maybe 15, 20 years old, so they have those holes and crevices that those animals can sneak out from. So it is a huge concern with animals running at large, and we try to do our best. I mean, we're a small community, and we have three animal control officers, but you know, dogs can be sneaky. They can get around the community, and they just have to be very diligent in what they do and how they capture these animals.
Mayor Perez, you've been 23 years as paramedic and 33 years as firefighter, and you were telling me in the email that we're exchanging that you've been seeing in the Hispanic community firsthand the problem of diabetes.
Yes, ma'am. Fortunately, I'm an elected mayor, but I'm a volunteer, so I have to have a normal job. And by occupation, I am a paramedic, and I do still ride on an ambulance in my community. And I see it in the forefront, picking up patients with underlying conditions. And it's surprising on the amount of people that, when you ask their medical conditions, they say, I'm either pre diabetic or I am diabetic. And I see it, and I see how it compounds other medical problems where these individuals may be more sick should they've been able to manage their diabetes or their hypertension. And it's just it's at a growing rate from what I can even tell in the years that I've been on the ambulance. And so it's kind of unique for me because I am the mayor, but I also get to see all the challenges really up front when it comes to healthcare because I am in the home. I get to go visit that patient who's called 911, and it's truly alarming. And we as EMS professionals, we're pre-hospital, so we try to educate. Now you can look at me, got a little chubby face, so I tell people kind of do as I say, not as much as I do. But you have to kind of be very realistic with the folks and say if you continue on a path of unhealthy living, your mortality is going to come sooner than later. And so, I mean, I see it. Just I've been blessed to be in this opportunity to maybe help someone or help an individual. And it is not just in the Hispanic community; it's also in our African American community that we see it. And so, it's heart wrenching sometimes that if they would have just had access to proper health care and education on diet and exercise, and like the gentleman said before, one of the things that our city looked at is we recognize that we don't have a park within a mile of every port part of our city, and that's kind of the golden standards. You want to have access to a park within walking distance, and here in our community, we are doing that. We're actually building two new parks as we speak to kind of access the west side of town and the barrio, and so that's what we're kind of doing is we're doing that as a community. Is building these two beautiful parks and upgrading our parks with exercise equipment that we haven't done in the past because we see the need for those individuals to gain access free of charge. Just walk over to the park with your kiddos, toss the frisbee, and walk the track, the nature trail. And so we're excited what we're doing down here, but how do we get that message out? That's another thing that we need to try to do is how do we get the message out to let folks know this
Well,
availability is there.
yeah,
'Cause
getting the message out, Mayor, is important. That's why we do this program every week, because what we're hoping to do is to create a partnership with public policy professionals, people in government. For example, trying to encourage the Agriculture Commissioner of the state of Texas to pay attention and get resources down on the ground for communities. Part of the job of the Agriculture Commissioner in Texas is to promote Texas agriculture. And of course, promoting Texas agriculture leads to healthier lifestyles. And so we want to affect public policy that makes an impact on our communities. Everyone is aware, and you guys can jump in from a public policy perspective. I think there's probably things that we can do better. As the name of this show indicates, Texas Latino Conservatives, I've always advocated that conservatives ought to apply conservative principles to urban problems. And that would build the brand up. It would certainly help resolve some of the issues in our urban communities and rural communities. And I think it's absolutely important. So we're talking about public policy issues that affect healthcare outcomes. I mean, the state of Texas has been involved in a long struggle as to whether or not we're going to expand uh, uh, Medicaid in the state. And Professor
Right.
Kleinberg, it's a little bit of a complicated issue, but both Professor Liston and Kleinberg can probably talk to us a little bit about not participating in the expanded Medicaid. What are the consequences, and what are the consequences to the taxpayer and the community?
Well, the consequences in Houston is that more than 40%, 4 out of every 10 Hispanic families have no health insurance.
Wow.
Just incredible in today's world. And it's a beautiful example of where you need enlightened government programs and enlightened efforts to address the growing inequalities we've been talking about that underlie virtually all of these central challenges. And if we don't find a way to do that soon in this generation, if we allow another generation to go through the system, where one of the most striking things in terms of educational preparation for the knowledge economy of the 21st century, less than 10% of all graduating high school seniors who are Latino or African American, less than 10% pass the SAT at a level that indicates college readiness. And that's a powerful indictment of the fact that Latinos are far less likely to have access to quality preschool education when the brain is growing by 60%, when rich kids in Houston start kindergarten 1.5 to 2 years ahead of poor kids. And so what we need is enlightened government that can work with the private sector in Houston to turn around the trajectory that now condemns so many Latino kids to lives of enormous difficulty and access to all the things we've been talking about that have to do with the inequalities in the city. Right? So it's not going to happen without government working with the private sector and an enlightened government in a way I think we've talked before about Latinos are natural Republicans. They are deeply conservative. They believe more than any other community that if you work hard in the city, you can succeed. They understand the importance of education. They need to have the real opportunities to have access, as you were saying, also to access to exercise areas, to parks, to green spaces, to having no community in Houston that's a food desert and pushes unhealthy food on people that results in diabetes. So it's all a part of a public-private partnership that needs to be developed in collaboration with Republicans and Democrats together to say we're all in this together.
Yeah, I
And we
agree.
need
Professor,
They're not
hang on
investing.
real quick. I want to play devil's advocate, and Professor, you can jump in, and then Professor Liston can jump in. One of the arguments I hear is that those are magnets for attracting more illegal immigration. I mean, we have to come face to face with the reality that the masses that we see coming across, and listen, as an immigrant myself, as a refugee in this country, I understand the despair that Latin American families and families in the Caribbean basin are facing and want to come to the United States. This is, after all, the land of opportunity, but we have limited resources. So, Professor Kleinberg, one of the concerns I hear from my colleagues, my friends on the conservative side, is we've got to stop these magnets for illegal immigration, and that's a legitimate issue. That if we're providing free public education, free public health care through federally qualified health clinics and policies like EMTALA that says that you have to treat a patient that presents themselves at the hospital. Uh, these are drivers for continued illegal immigration. So, how do you folks in the academic world see this, and what possible solutions could we propose that are amenable to both Republicans and Democrats, which we know haven't been working together for some time? Because at the end of the day, our goal is to make a better Texas through public policy.
Yeah, I mean, let me quickly jump in here and then stop because I don't want to. The you pointed to it. I mean, the deepening difficulties of we are controlling the border much more than we had before, spending all kinds of money and controls. And we've got to find a way to open if we're going to build a gate, to also have a door. If we have a wall, let's build a gate that opens because we're going to need more immigrants as the aging of Americans and especially of Anglos continues. But meanwhile, we've got 10 million people who are here illegally, who've been here for 20, 30 years. And it would be the most obvious thing to find a way to provide them with legal status and especially their children, right? There's a
By
kind
the
of a
way, we have a
shared
solution for that, Dr. Kleinberg, but we'll get into
shared
that later.
understanding of DACA, which we ought to be able to reach some agreement on that. These are kids who were largely born here, who came here involuntarily, who's this is the only country they know. They have gone to college, they have served in the military, and we lock them out of opportunity for the rest of their lives in a way that is just against all values in America, Republican and Democrat equally. We need to at least find a way to agree on that, and then have a rational discussion about how many and which kinds of immigrants should we allow to come here because we're going to need immigrants
So
as the
Professor
aging.
Kleinberg, you don't take an issue with us as Americans through public policy deciding who comes in and how many come in. I mean, can we agree on that? We have to have an
Yeah,
effective immigration policy, right or wrong?
right. It's
Okay.
exactly that's one of the consensus. You can't just open the gates, obviously,
Okay.
and you have to have some control over who's allowed to come. But meanwhile, we've got 10 million people who have come here, have been working here, have contributing enormously to, and are overwhelmingly Latinos. For God's sakes, give them a chance to have a decent life,
Right.
right?
Dr.
And
Liston.
provide the leadership that we need.
Yeah, I agree. Dr. Liston, is that a driver for continued illegal immigration? And what are possible solutions?
Well, I really don't think that's the driver for illegal immigration. I think really what's driving the illegal immigration or the undocumented immigration is actually a push factor from the countries of origin, right? So all these Latin American countries that have, poor, governance, right? Their governments are not actually working for them. That's what's actually pushing all these undocumented workers to come over across the border, right? And then so really that's what I see the problem is. But
That's
I guess
correct.
from the Hispanic perspective, um, you have to remember that the Hispanic person, whether a U.S. born Hispanic or a foreign born Hispanic, comes from a lower starting point economically, right? And that's the main issue at that's causing all these different problems, right? Healthcare outcomes and so on, right? Versus their white counterparts that have actually inherited a better situation, right? They live in better neighborhoods, they live in better school districts. They have better access to healthcare. All of these things are the things that are not letting the Hispanic in the U.S. actually fulfill his entire promise, right? Um, of his potential. So I think we need to address those issues, right? And as far as like the undocumented workers, I think we probably have a lot more Hispanics here in the U.S. that are not undocumented, right?
Of
And
course.
and just from a healthcare outcome perspective, it's actually kind of ironic, or it's kind of like a paradox where the foreign-born Hispanic actually has better healthcare outcomes than the U.S.-born Hispanic, right? So, so somehow the U.S.-born Hispanic maybe eats worse food, goes to fast food chains, doesn't have maybe access to better food and all these other different things. So and so that's one of the things that I learned before I came on your show, this Hispanic paradox, where Hispanics actually have lower incomes and their jobs aren't as good, but their death rate is actually lower than their white counterparts. So that's good news, right? Somehow the culture, right, the culture of maybe eating better food or something is actually having a lower death rate than their white counterparts. But then
Right.
when they're U.S. born, that kind of goes away, right? And they have similar or worse healthcare outcomes. And one thing that I do want to mention is that in terms of diabetes, Hispanics do have like way worse outcomes than their white counterparts. So diabetes is a major problem, for Hispanics in the U.S., and it's also a major problem for Hispanics outside of the U.S. Right? We know that in Mexico, obesity levels and diabetes levels are very bad in Mexico. Now, linking that with COVID, we know that the Hispanic experience of COVID in the U.S. has been very bad. Right? We've had like death rates that are worse than their white counterparts. And one of the possible links could be the fact that that Hispanics have higher levels of diabetes compared to their white counterparts.
Yeah, it's what they call comorbidities. And, another issue I learned, of course, is that Hispanics are essential service workers. So they've
Exactly.
got to show up to the hotel and fix those rooms. They've got to show up to the restaurants and wait tables and cook the food. They have to show up to the construction site on the highway. So they don't have the luxury of, you know, zooming in as bankers do or as CEOs or as office workers do. So it disproportionately, I think, puts them in a more susceptible circumstance than the
Yeah,
average worker.
And
COVID has
also,
exaggerated the inequalities.
yeah, and also, what we were talking at the beginning, not only, the lack of education, that we need more investment on the private and the government sector, but also if we don't have access not only to supermarket, but also to the parks and places to exercise. Also, you see on the communities, in the Hispanic community, low income communities, and also the mayor from Angleton can also confirm this. Also in the south of Texas, I used to live in Laredo, and it's hard to find also restaurants that sell healthy dishes or healthy plates or healthy food. That means you find all over fast food restaurants. So the fast food restaurants are investing in the low income communities. The fast food restaurants are investing in the South Texas communities. But they're not, you don't find restaurants that are investing in a healthy food in these communities. So that's another problem, that we don't see any investors and the private sector investing in our
Well, let
communities.
me just jump in and say, look, there's the we have to understand basic economics. I mean, the Palm restaurant that'll serve you a lean slice of meat for $48 isn't going to open up in Laredo because the society can't support a restaurant, so they have to close. I
But
mean,
it's
that's why.
many. But these days, you find many fast food restaurants with healthy food, and also they're not investing in our communities.
Well,
You know that it doesn't cost a lot of money.
yeah, one of the things that we want to do, and you guys can jump in, for example, I'm trying to push, let's say, our major retailers of groceries, for example, Kroger, HEB, Randall's, you name them. I don't understand why they can't open up a 75,000 square foot grocery store in the Fifth Ward, Second Ward, but they can certainly partner with government and the state health department and the agriculture department and say we'll open up a 5,000 or a 6,000 square foot facility. We could offer some tax incentives, and by the way, we're going to beef up the Department of Agriculture and we're going to put a nutritionist in each one of those facilities so that when the parents come in to shop, they're given basic nutrition education. That seems to me like a very simple solution to educate the community on the ground and in their neighborhood. Am I right or wrong, guys?
No, you're right, and it's also beginning to happen. And so we ought not to despair, right? I think the most powerful thing is, again, which I touched on earlier, the demographics are so powerful. The average age of Anglos in Harris County, Texas is 46. The average age of Latinos is 25. No force in the world is going to stop Houston or Texas or America from becoming more African American, more Asian, more Latino, and less Anglo as the 21st century unfolds. So we're in the process of a transformation where this biracial southern city dominated by white men is now the most ethnically diverse major metropolitan area in the country. And younger Anglos are embracing this diversity in a way that we older Anglos are still struggling to accept. And you can see this process unfold in a way that ought to give us all some optimism, some sense that with all the frustrations and the slowness with which these changes are occurring, they are inevitably occurring. And the future is increasingly clear. And if we believe in the future and care about the future of Houston, investing in Latinos is a very good place to start in terms of building the workforce of the 21st century.
Your comments,
And
Dr. Perez Liston.
and piggybacking on what Dr. Kleinberg said, I mean, we have to remember that a rising tide lifts all boats, right? I mean, it's not benefiting Hispanics at the cost of males in the country, right? I mean, if everyone has a better education, everyone has better healthcare outcomes, then our GDP is actually going to be better. We're actually going to do better in this country, all of us together. So, uh, investing in, communities that are disadvantaged is actually to the benefit of all communities in the country, right?
You're here. You're here.
Well, I got to say that I remember that Dr. Kleinberg was kind enough many, many years ago, he may not remember this, to invite me to sort of a roundtable discussion on education. And this was back when a hot button issue was facing many Texans, and that is whether we should have pre-K education. And one of the things that stuck with me, I can't remember if it was Dr. Kleinberg or another participant in the roundtable, said that a Hispanic child or a low income child or a child of parents who may not have a high level of education has something like, and I'm going to throw a number out, like a 10,000 word deficiency when they start kindergarten compared to a parent who reads to their children, has a higher socioeconomic status. And that was stunning to me because I can tell you, as an immigrant who did not speak a lick of English, it was a huge disadvantage for me. And so I often wonder, if you remove the politics, you know, does pre-K education benefit the society? And I mean, as a conservative, I've come to the conclusion that absolutely it benefits us.
Here, here. Good for you, Arlette.
Well, okay.
Absolutely, I remember that too.
Okay, good, good. And so you look,
Yes,
I bring
I
these
agree.
issues up
we're
because
all in this
these,
together.
yeah, these have to be starting principles. And one of the things, I mean, is in this program, we're talking about Latinos and we're talking about Asians and African Americans. And one of the things I do is I try to refer to everybody as Texans.
Yeah.
We're in this together. You know,
Exactly.
great, we have a changing demographics, but at the end of the day, the children of immigrants, whether they're legal or illegal, born here, are now U.S. citizens. They're Americans, they're Texans, and we're in this together.
You're
I
here.
agree.
That's exactly.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay,
And I
Andrea?
think we're beginning to
I agree,
recognize.
Orlando. One of the things I want to mention, this is relevant to our discussion, is I'm a professor right now, and I'm, privileged to teach, all the people who are getting their bachelor's and master's degrees and stuff like that. But when I was younger, I was actually a high school teacher, and I was a high school teacher in South Texas in the McAllen area, and it was it was a difficult situation, right? Being a teacher today is very, very difficult, very challenging, right? Being a university professor is, a privilege, but being a teacher in high school and kindergarten and elementary is a real challenge, especially in these communities that are disadvantaged. So I really, want policymakers to understand the challenges that all these teachers out there and all these different school districts are facing, right? And the way we're organizing school districts, right? That's also an important issue. Where we have, school districts that are, basically like in poor neighborhoods, right? And the type of education they're getting compared to school districts that are in rich neighborhoods, right? So all these things need to be addressed slowly over time, but we're impatient, right? We need to do this quicker rather than slower, right? Like Dr. Kleinberg was saying, it's been moving, right? We've been benefiting, we've been doing better, but I think the pace is not fast enough. We need to do better.
Well, from a public policy perspective, I'm always a little bit baffled. I've taken an interest in public education because I think it's important. I was educated mostly through public schools. But I hate to see what's happened to our traditional, African American neighborhoods and some schools in the barrios, as you all know. And Children at Risk has a great website that ranks all these schools. But even the State Department of Education has ranked a number of schools as failing for several years in Houston. And it was Harold Dutton, a state representative, African American, that came up with the legislation that if these schools continue to fail, that they should be taken over by the Secretary or the Secretary of Education here in the state of Texas. And when they do that, what does the school district do? And some other interest groups is sue the state. So there's there's so much politics involved, and it leaves the child, the family, and the taxpayer behind. And we've all agreed, I guess, from these comments that education is a tool that's necessary for upward mobility to have better healthcare outcomes in the state of Texas. So, what do we do? How do we get these public policy makers to work together to realize that failing schools actually should be shut down?
Yeah, yeah, that's a big challenge. That's a really big challenge, and you know, it's a lot of these problems. I see them as things that can be solved, right? That can be worked on, but the politics gets in the way, which is what you mentioned, Orlando. And it's very important for people to understand that, you know, we're not Democrats, we're not Republicans, we're not independents, we're Americans, right? And we're Texans, right? And we need to address these problems in a very pragmatic way. Unfortunately, you know, Facebook, you know, social media platforms, you know, the 24/7 news cycle, I think, has exacerbated these differences in our country, and you know, it's drawing our attention away from solving all these important problems that actually get to the source of the problem and actually correct the problem and actually improve society, right? So I think, you know, we just need to be, I guess, more work together. Politicians, the mayor can chime in on this. You know, he's a politician. He can tell us how difficult it is for politicians to work with each other.
Social media and the media is another epidemic.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, Andrea. Totally.
Even though that I
Yes.
used to
Well,
work on
I,
one of those, but Mayor, your comments about that.
Yeah, I mean, I do see that, and I've been blessed and fortunate once again. Is I get invited to go into the schools and see what's going on over there. And it's truly an amazement when I'm walking through the campuses or at the elementary level, and I do see you know, the little Latino kids, and they may be off in a classroom because they're learning English as a second language, and you know, I can see maybe some of they're scared. Or maybe they're still trying to understand kind of what's going on in our community. So I really think part of it here in Angleton, we have a great school system. I know they do a wonderful job, but I really think that we need to come together. And sometimes the smaller communities may have some of the solutions to help the bigger communities. We certainly look at the larger communities for solutions to our problems, but maybe there needs to be more of a consensus, getting together with those rural and those non-metro communities and see how we can combat this and work this together with our education system, because I seem to think that the smaller schools districts may have a little tighter grasp on what's going on than maybe some of our larger communities, you know, like the HISDs, the Dallas Fort Worth areas, but because they can really analyze, I think, at a much closer level due to that. But I'm all in. I mean, I meet with my superintendent quite regularly and visit with him and see how we can work together to address any needs. But I'm glad what we're doing in our community, trying to do that. But yeah, trying to get politicians together to come to consensus. Luckily for our level, we don't have to pick a side, whether we're Democrat or Republican. We just look together to fix a common problem or problem, and come up with a workable solution that we know it's going to be the best for everyone.
You know, it's always very interesting to me, Mayor. I'm a property taxpayer both in Harris County, which is the third largest school district in the United States, and I'm a taxpayer in Kinney County. So I actually pay school taxes in 4 counties in the United States. But be that as it may, uh, the outcomes in bracket. In other words, Kinney County is a border county. It's one of the poorest counties in Texas. Yet their school, the Bracketville High School, a Brackett Independent School District, and we've had their superintendent on our program, has some pretty darn good outcomes. And I wonder to myself, you folks in the education business, how can a school in a border community like Bracketville, Texas, Kinney County, Texas, have such good results in their public education system, and yet the city of Houston, through HISD, have such poor results in areas that are in greater need of a good education? I'll let Professor Kleinberg try to tackle that one.
well, let me just pick up on some of the themes here. It isn't just schools. It isn't just education. It isn't just teachers. There are all sorts of consequences of poverty, that have to do with access to health and dental care, that have to do with stable households that are and affordability when there's this epidemic of evictions going on in Houston. All the systems that make it possible for kids to succeed and to have environments where they can study and they can do well and they can have support systems. So it is, and teachers can't do it alone. Schools need communities that are succeeding, and so many of the things we've been talking about that have to do with the deepening poverty in Houston underlie the inadequacies of education writ large. It's a community that we need to become a learning society. I tell everyone who will listen, and when I give these talks about our findings, that every church in Houston ought to be providing preschool and after school programs. Every business in Houston ought to adopt a school. And we ought to recognize that in order to succeed, we need all of us as a learning society to support this next generation and ensure that people have access to opportunities to acquire new skills as the world changes. We think the average high school graduate today will have a college graduate will have 5 to 6 career changes before he or she retires sometime in the ages 80 or 85. This is a new world, and education is the centerpiece because we're in a global economy where companies can produce goods anywhere. We're at the beginnings of the robotics revolution. If you're doing a job I can program a computer to do, I'm going to replace your job with an intelligent machine. This is a world of education. And education is not just teachers and students, it's all of us. And I think that's a key part that we've been touching on here that needs to be emphasized and underlined. And when schools succeed, it's because the communities are there to provide a support system that is so critical to success.
All right. Well, look, it is now almost the noon hour, so we appreciate each and every one of you participating with us. I think I'd like to give everybody just 1 minute with a closing remark, or maybe, as Andrea likes to call it,
Call to action.
A call to action. We get several thousand viewers of this program, not all live. Some of them watch it on YouTube afterwards. But so, Professor Kleinberg, what's in 1 minute your call to action to the community that's watching us?
I think I said it, that all of us need to become part of a learning society of lifelong learning, of education from birth to college, from cradle to career. Rich kids in Houston start kindergarten 1.5 to 2 years ahead of poor kids. And we know that. And it's absolutely critical. And that's why this effort in Washington to ensure universal access to quality preschool education, it may be the most critical piece that we can make in preparing this next generation for the jobs of the 21st century in a world where Latinos are going to become by far the most dominant community. Anglos are aging rapidly. This is a new world of absolutely clarity and predictability. How do we ensure that this becomes the great asset that Houston could have as it positions itself in the global economy and make sure it doesn't end up tearing us apart? The central question for Houston's future lies in the kinds of issues that we've been talking about today.
Professor Liston.
Now, I'm not a politician, right? I'm a professor, right? Just to get that clear, make that very clear. But one thing that I do want to say to all the Hispanics out there is get out and vote. You need to vote. There's too many people that I know who have never voted in this life and who are, legally capable of voting. So you need to get out and vote. That's number one. Number two is you need to vote for politicians, whether Democratic or Republican politicians, that advance your interests, right? If your interests are education, healthcare, taxes, whatever it may be, you need to vote for politicians that advance your community interests.
Great. Yeah, definitely. We need that. And we need more participation, not only vote, but also run for office, our Latino community. Mayor, your comments, your call to action.
Yes, ma'am. And just like Dr. Liston said, get involved. I do notice in my community, the Hispanic community, they're not as involved as like myself. Not that I'm the prime example, but I see that in my community, whether it's on boards, commissions, even on our council. I was I think I'm the second Hispanic ever elected at the city of Angleton and the first Hispanic mayor elected. Get involved and represent not just the Hispanic community, but all of our community. You need if you want to make this better, want to make this place or make Texas better, go get involved. Whether it's at your local school, it's a local health clinic, if it's at your city government level, if it's if it's a mentorship program, go be the action, be the example of that action, and show individuals who think that they can't. By all means, you can. One of my dreams was become a mayor, and look where I'm at today. But I also did have some mentors to look at, my parents and other Hispanics that maybe weren't as involved, but I saw their qualities, and I wanted to be like those. So just make yourself that better person. Get involved, get involved, get involved. I can't preach that enough.
All right. Well, thank you, Professor Kleinberg, for taking part of your day to be with us. Thank you, Professor Liston. And thank you, Mayor Perez, for joining us on such short notice. You guys have a wonderful and productive rest of the day. The rest of you, thank you for joining us as you do every Wednesday. Remember, check out our website. It's TexasLatinoConservatives.com. We take public policy positions that hopefully will make Texas a better state. It's a great state, but we can improve. I love Professor Kleinberg's optimism. He's been a dear friend for many, many years, and he always sees the glass as half full. So I'm always inspired by him, and I appreciate Dr. Liston sharing part of his wisdom over at the University of St. Thomas with us, which is a great Catholic institution here in Houston, not far away. Their neighbor is Rice University. And so we have great institutions of higher learning here in Houston, the University of Houston, the downtown campus, Rice University, Houston Baptist University, University of Texas Health Science Center, Baylor Medical. I mean, it just goes on and on. So there are many educational opportunities, but we've got to get these young kids prepared. And we have to realize
And the parents. For me, the key also is the
well,
parents. We
I
need to
agree.
educate the parents.
I agree, but it's a heavy lift. I mean, we got to get these kids ready to
Yeah.
start kindergarten with a good vocabulary, and then get them on, not necessarily onto college, because college is not for everyone. But we have Houston Community College. We have great 2-year colleges that are technical schools that prepare the community for a 6-figure salary. My God, I was talking to a air conditioning man the other day, and he makes a lot more than I do,
yeah,
and,
for sure.
and when I have a plumbing problem,
sure.
the plumbers
The plumbers.
plumbers
Imagine,
drive the
after
plumbers
February, the plumbers become
the plumber shows up in a 2021 Ford F350, and I've got a 96 Ford F250.
No kidding.
So there are tremendous opportunities, but it all starts with education. And thank you guys. Gracias a todos. Check us out on our website, and don't forget our Leadership Latino class in San Antonio,
November 6th. And my call to action is go to our website, TexasLatinoConservatives.com, become a member, and also visit us in LeadershipLatino.com. And our class is going to be November 6th. Not only we need to vote, but also we need to participate. We need to become a candidate, and we need more representation in our Latino community.
We need to become responsible citizens, involved citizens, and make a contribution to this great country. This is what has made America the greatest country in the world. This is what makes America the shining star on the hill. This is why everyone from every corner of the world wants to come to America. Andrea's an immigrant. I'm an immigrant. Because this is, in fact, the land of opportunity. But we all have to get out and pull the wagon as Americans and as Texans in the same direction, so this continues to be the shining star of opportunity in the world. And as a program note, I can tell you that now that the special legislative session is over, I've spoken to our Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. He will be on the program. Those program notes will be on our website, but make sure you tune in for a conversation with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. So enjoy the rest of your week. God bless.
Like us and share, and I'll see you guys next Wednesday. Nos vemos. Chao, chao.